So that first session is called Getting Started with Analytics. It's the first talk out of 3 on analytics, especially product analytics. So these talks are should be very relevant for software companies, especially the ones with a web application or a mobile application. And a lot of the concepts we're going to touch on, especially on the second sessions, are relevant for subscription businesses. So if you're not like a one-off business, like an e-commerce application, but you expect your customers to come back and potentially to pay you every month, then hopefully some of the concepts we're going to see are going to be very relevant for you. So today we're going to talk about the basics, about instrumentation, how analytics work, a couple of frameworks around analytics, very simple frameworks that you could use yourself in the coming days. And I'm going to give you some stages to kind of get to a first epiphany, and again give you some kind of toolbox to start thinking about analytics for your product. During the next session, we're going to talk about metrics and processes as you grow. So we're going to go into more details about precisely what could be some of the metrics you look at for depending on the metrics, the business that you have. And last, we're going to look into some benchmarks and methods to improve your product. So as you start to measure things in your product, you're going to get some result. And it's usually pretty hard to understand if these things are good or not good. And so I'm going to try to give you some keys and ways to improve your product based on the different metrics results you may get from this analytics early work. A few words on myself. I think the interesting thing about my background is I've worked for different company stages. I worked for a startup called N26, which is a fintech based in Berlin, while it was still a 150 people startup. Worked for a large corporate enterprise e-commerce in Berlin, also called Zalando, and then joined a later stage, let's say scale up B2B SaaS. I think what's quite interesting about this background is that I've touched many very different verticals. And nevertheless, I think there are some common patterns around how we were measuring things in these 3 different companies, no matter the sizes and the verticals. So yeah, similar to kind of the frameworks you can use in product, no matter the company and the verticals you work for, I think there are similar patterns happening with analytics, which is what we're going to go through. Okay, so first thing is, how should you instrument your data? How should you instrument your product? It's usually a pretty hard question to understand, to answer, given all the noise you have in this industry. If you look at analytics or product analytics out there, you're going to find many resources. And actually, what happens often when you're early stage company is that you would potentially spend more time finding out the right tool than you're going to spend, measuring your actual users' behavior and get some insight out of this behavior. So the role of today as presentation, again, is trying to cut through this noise and find some simple, steps. So if you're curious about what we're building, what I move on today, I'm actually starting my own project in the analytics space, which is called June.so, which is what we call an instant analytics. So it's a way to connect your data source and then get out of templates automated analysis based on the use cases that you have. Especially, we think it's especially relevant for startups. And yeah, maybe you could get some value out of it. So feel free to check it out. So the structure of today's presentation is going to be this one. I'm first going to go through a framework that we call goals, metrics, and tracking, which is a very easy way to remember how to run analytics in a startup, and starting with the right side of things. The second piece I'm going to go through are the 3 stages to get to some first epiphany. Again, a product is usually very meaty, and there are just many things you can be looking at. And so I'm going to try to give you a framework about what to look at first and then where to zoom in next. The third piece we're going to look at for today's basics discussion on analytics is how to make hypotheses and why being able to make hypotheses is extremely crucial to nail your analytics. So I'm going to get started with the goals, metrics, and tracking framework. So analytics starts with a goal. It usually starts with a simple goal, which is around your user's behavior and can be simplified around your users' behaviors. If you want to put together some goals, just think about what your company is trying to achieve. It's usually one of the 2 that I've listed here, either having more customers or trying to get more customers to spend more. That's like just typical goals. Once you have these goals, this is where you're going to be able to, move forward. So the cool thing about goals is that you can also break them down into sub goals, and this is what gives you focus, right? So I said one of the goals could be I want more customers. So what that means is that potentially you want more people to find your product, or you want more people that find your product that actually turn into active customers, right? And the more you break down these goals, the more you're going to be able to actually map some actual metrics and measurement about the things that you want to move. So never forget that, analytics always start with a goal. It's always useful to think in basic business terms before getting into the very, technical weeds of the topic. So this is the $1 billion question. Now, how can you use data to reach your goal? Well, this is where metrics come into play. So metrics are basically the direct mapping or the direct translation from goals into quantifiable aspects. So metrics are measurable actions that your users can take inside your product, which align with your goals. Usually good metrics are actionable, they're tailored, they're very narrow, and also they're quite specific to a cohort or an audience that you want to go after. If you have like a product with some early traction or a decent user base, it's very classic that you have a lot of noise and a set of very different people, and you want to start analyzing, the actions of your users against some specific segment of users. We're going to go into details about how you can use cohort or audiences in your product a little bit later on. So an example of metric, if I go back to my initial goal, let's say one goal could be to increase your acquisition by 10%. A typical metric around this acquisition goal could be your conversion rate. You want more people to convert and start using your product. Conversion rate typically is something like the ratio of the users that sign up divided by your total unique visitors. This is a great metric. It typically aligns with your goal. If you manage to move the conversion rate, it's going to have a direct impact on your goal. So there's one question that usually comes at this point, which is how many metrics do you need for to move your goal? How many metrics do you need every time you release an improvement to your product? In general, and this is what I'm going to advocate all throughout this workshop, you want to start small. You want to start simple. One of the problem with analytics is usually that, again, it's very hairy, it's very scary and intimidating, and you want to do too much from day one, and it feels like very overwhelming and you struggle to progress. So typically, when you want to move a goal, you'd like to have one metric or maybe two. If you have two of them, you may call them primary metric and secondary metric. The primary metric may be the one that has a direct impact on the, on the goal. The secondary may be just a way to validate that, things are working in the right direction. You're not just cheating your metric. So there are a couple of really good examples, but let's say if we go back to our initial metric, initial goal, which was to increase the acquisition, you may have a primary metric, which is your conversion rate. You may also have a secondary metric, which is how many people actually sign up, or maybe even the satisfaction, right? You want to make sure that people are signing up and they convert, but you didn't trick them with a dark pattern, for instance. So again, I would just recommend starting with a primary metric if you're getting started, but that's how complex, let's say, the metrics framework could go. So let's look at the Facebook profile page. This is my Facebook profile page. A good primary metric for, let's say, a product manager or let's say a founder that would have built a similar product could have been the percentage of users that go to their own profile page or someone else's profile page, right? A secondary metric could be the percentage of users who added a photo within a week after basically reaching this page. What that means is that you don't only want people to reach that page, but you actually want people to take some actions, right? Which is probably a more healthy behavior around that specific metric. And let's say a goal around, going to your profile could have been just to increase your active users. Maybe Facebook had this hypothesis that the more you were editing your page, the more you were editing visiting other people's page, the more active you were. Actually, I think it's part of the genesis of Facebook. It was mostly a library with profiles, and you could just navigate to other people's profile and just, check their updates, check their latest pictures, check the status, bios, whatever. And this was just the genesis of Facebook. So a great way to give your product data a clear direction and purpose is to boil down also your effort into one single metric. So this is typically referred as the one metric example. If you've ever read, kind of analytics cases around Twitter, Dropbox, Slack, where they basically realize that you can simplify the success of your users to a set of core actions that they're going to do within a set of time. And if your customers are able to do that, then they're going to pass what is called kind of the activation threshold. So for instance, Twitter realized that they wanted their customers to see a specific number of feed views within a small amount of time to become active. Slack did the same and realized that actually, if a company was sending around 2,000 messages, the company was going to be very, very likely to stay. And Facebook has this very famous metric called add 77 friends within 10 days, which is basically the amount of friends you need to add in a short amount of time to become very active on Facebook. What these companies have realized by just shrinking these activation metrics is that there is an easy pattern that they can productize to make their customers active at scale. So for instance, when you sign up on Facebook, they're gonna urge you to invite friends. And especially in the first days of your experience, because they know this is what correlates the most with customers being sticky. So again, around metrics, there's just like so much out there, so many things you can go through. We're going to go through some of the most common metrics in the next workshop, but they're just like many things out there you could be looking at. And I think for product companies, the one metric is a very, very important metric to nail as soon as you can afford to spend a bit of time on it. So if you want to drive this exercise on your side, it would look something like, what does it take for the users that you have to really use your product and realize the value? You can write this exercise yourself. I think picking the right metric is some kind of hard. There's just many readings out there. You can talk with other founders. You can try out a lot of things on your side. You can also talk with investors if you raise any capital. They usually have a lot of experience with what other startups have done and what could be successful. And I would say do not worry with that. You're going to learn over time. Again, I'm going to share some resources, the slides from today, tomorrow, and so on with you. But there are just many things out there that, you could be finding yourself over time when the question arises, basically. So this is where tracking comes into play. Now that you know that you have a business goal that you want to move, and you've aligned some clearly defined metrics around these goals, the question is, how do you track this goal? How do you track this metric? And this is fundamentally tracking. This is how you measure the metrics. So tracking is the easiest way to collect data. It usually comes into two formats, something we call implicit tracking, and the alternative, which we call explicit tracking. So implicit tracking is typically Google Analytics or full story. This kind of like JavaScript snippet that you put that collects everything in your product. Explicit tracking are a little bit more technical. The most common solutions out there would be Google Tag Manager, the CDPs, the customer data platforms such as Segment, or any kind of like JavaScript or SDK from a traditional analytics solution like Amplitude or Mixpanel. So implicit tracking, also known as a codeless event tracking, is meant to collect the interaction within your application automatically. And explicit tracking is kind of like, it needs to be done manually. So it's a little bit more work. There are pros and cons for both solutions. The interesting thing about implicit tracking is that it's great if you have non-technical skills. You just ask your engineers to put those snippets once and it works automatically. And it's pretty easy. Like the event definition, the name of what you're tracking is going to be pretty easy. The problem is that you're going to track a lot of things and your data is going to become quite messy over time. And it can break every time you deploy a new aspect of your product. And it's more and more blocked by upcoming technologies such as ad blockers, which are blocking, tracking events from being triggered from application these days. A quick word on ad blockers. Roughly, there are common estimation that said that 20 to 30% of the software product users are using ad blockers. So if you're using an implicit tracking solution, you could see up to 20 or 30% of your tracking data being biased, basically. Explicit tracking is so the aspect of like explicitly tracking some aspect of the actions in your product. You need engineers for that. Even though it can be quite lightweight, these tools still require some technical skills. And what's cool with that is that the data is a lot more accurate. You can rely on the data, especially if you track a lot of the backend interactions happening in your product. And you also only track what you need, meaning that your data is usually a lot less messy. So what we're seeing is that implicit tracking is a great way to collect qualitative feedbacks, like heat map, recording, and so on. But we're seeing a big shift toward explicit tracking. So we just observed that the future of tracking and metrics seems to be more along the lines of explicit tracking. So this is why I'm going to dive a little bit more into explicit tracking for the rest of this conversation. So we're going to focus on two things when it comes to explicit tracking. First, the event name, and second, the event property. So this is what defines a tracking or a tracking event or an event. This is the name and the property. So why do you need a name? So a name is a description of what the event does. So let's say you have a goal which was to increase your acquisition, then one of the metrics you could have is the conversion rate. And so one of the things you would want to look at is whether or not people are signing up. And so typically you would need a tracking event to understand if your users are signing up. So this is what I call the event name. The event names are really important because they're shown everywhere. They're shown in your code when you track users' behavior. They're going to show in your dashboard, in your SQL queries. No matter where you want to query the data around the event, there would be a name. So there is a lot of actually discussions around how this event should be named, just so that you make sure that over time, this doesn't get confusing for you. So if you haven't set a convention of names yet, again, there are many things out there, but I'm going to give you some kind of shortcut. There are three main syntaxes: snake case, camel case, and title case. We see a lot of people adopting snake case because it's not case sensitive. If you want to perform some search on them, on the event names, for instance, in the tools that you use. And also kind of the underscore split the word very clearly. So it's quite easy for the eyes to look at these events and understand them. When you have a lot of events, you're going to have this problem, which is you're going to forget what event matches what event is for what. Also, if you have new people joining your company or leaving your company, the context is going to be lost. So people tend to have like single source of truth where they store the event names and the description. This is often called a tagging plan. You can have a tagging plan in some kind of like spreadsheet, Notion document, Coda, whatever tool you prefer. And there are more and more tools right now that tries to do this kind of like tagging plan right in the tool. This is pretty cool because then you don't have to manually update this information. You don't have errors. And also it can be updated in live in case you don't want to go back and update this information. Again, there are many resources out there to start building your own tagging plan. I think if you start with a simple approach, you probably will have like 3 or 5 events with very clear description. You probably don't even need that. But as you scale, you'll see this will become a problem. The next piece of the event, beside the name, is what is called the property. So this is attached to the event to give some context around what is happening. So let's say your goal was to increase acquisition and the event was a user sign up. Then a property could be, where is the person signing up? What location? Which campaign? Is it an email marketing campaign or is it a paid Facebook campaign, right? You can also attach information like what's the user profile, right? What's the information about this user? Whatever information you pass is going to be a layer of the cake that you're going to be able to use to then analyze your data. So let's say you have the conversion rate and you want to understand only people that came from Facebook versus your paid campaign, and you want to understand if they took some of the action you expected them to take. You can filter this based on the source. This is a lot more advanced. I'm going to skip it for now. So now that we've seen how to break down goals into metrics and tracking, the question is, what do you track first? So I'm going to give you a very, very simple framework that I think is relevant, no matter the stage of your company. It's called the 3 stages to analytics epiphany. So what we recommend people to do is first to get a bird's view of their product before they narrow down into any specific aspect of their product. A really nice analysis you can start running today is called a feature audit, which is a way to understand the main directions that your customers can take in your product and get kind of a bird's view of what are the actions that people broadly take in your product. You can start to zoom into specific actions and whether people did X and Y or look into this very cool thing you just shipped. But until you get a bird's view of why are people coming back, I think it would be kind of like a bit too rushed to move on to the next step. So a feature audit is a way just to understand the popularity and the frequency at which your core features are being used. So the top right corner here means that the feature is used by all the people all the time. It's typically called a star feature. And with this kind of feature, you're probably just going to iterate because people are coming back for it. It delivers maximum value. You really want to nail it down. On the contrary, a feature which is used by very few people, but all of the time, means that it's a delighter, but for a few people. So you probably want to do some research around this feature and understand, why are there so few people that use it all of the time? Is it because it only applies to a specific audience? Is it because you have a discovery problem? Yada. So this is also where you can start to zoom into your extra data and understand why are people precisely doing into each of these features. Okay, moving on. Okay, so features with limited adoption, as I said, have different choices. You can just increase their frequency, or you can increase the adoption of them. You can also, drop them altogether. You can kill them. Again, by having this clear picture of where your features rank in this diagram, you get an idea of what's relevant or not to analyze further. So that's when you zoom in, actually. That's when you zoom into specific features on which you have questions or hypotheses and things you want to answer. So let's say you have a sign-up feature and you know that people, like 100% literally of the users that use your product have started to sign up. You may want to understand whether or not people are finishing your sign-up. And this is where you break down your sign-up into steps, if you have several steps, of course. So that could be sign-up step 1, 3, 2, and 3, and so on. One question which is really coming up again and again for early stage companies is whether or not you should start thinking about your retention in the early days. So they are an easy way to look into your retention, which is called a retention curve, which is a way to understand over time if your customers are coming back on your product. So here the axis is the time, the number of days, and the vertical axis is the percentage of people who are coming back. So in short, if the curve doesn't stabilize, so if it's the green curve, it's a trend downward, then it means you have a retention problem and you should start working on that very heavily. So don't worry if you have such a curve, it's very common for the stage product. And to be frank, even larger companies at later stage still fight to get the curve flat for a new subset of customers or for a new subset of product offers that they have. It's very traditional to launch something new to a new set of people that don't stick and you need to iterate on it. It's actually going to be the ongoing challenge of any product or software companies out there. So another question is whether or not you should work on your acquisition. So the point is very, very clear here. Like you need some acquisition to fulfill your user base and work on your retention. So the general advice is like you need to focus on both. Like you need to breathe and eat at the same time. And you don't need a lot of users to start working on your retention. You don't need like 1,000 users to work on your retention. Even a small subset is great. For those who are willing to raise some capitals, also, this is one of the metrics that investors, especially VC funds, are going to look very, very heavily into. For those who are willing to build a bootstrap business, this is also something which is really important for you because it tells you whether or not the people that you sign up and on board are going to stick around over time. So of course, it is easier to expand your user base than the satisfaction and the retention. I didn't say that. Paul Graham said that, and whatever he says is right. So yeah, like stick, be consistent and do not despair for that. It's common. So the last aspect, when you're able to get this bird's view of what's your business like, and then you decide to zoom in, is whether or not you can analyze your data with several layers. This is what I called the layers of the cake earlier today. So for that, there's just basically two things you can do. A is to use the properties of the event, or you can also use information about the users. I'm going to first talk about the properties. So we looked into the event earlier today, and we say one of the property could be the source, right? Is it coming from, Facebook or Google? Or is it coming from, paid search or kind of organic? If you attach such a property in the information of your event, then you're going to be able to run this analysis for different, aspect of the event. For instance, the source. The next thing I didn't actually put here is the trait. So similar to information that you can pass on your event, you can also pass some information about the users. And you could also segment your data based on some specific segment of users only. So let's say it's very basic, but let's say you want to differentiate the gender of the users. I don't know why you would do that. You could pass an information on your users to say whether the gender is male or female. And then you could analyze your data to understand if the metric you're looking at is different based on the gender. So for instance, the retention curve, there could be two of them, one for female and one for male. So that's for the second step. The stages to get you to a first analytics epiphany, like this kind of idea to start broad and then zoom in and even like layer your data to get to this insight. I think whenever you have an analytics issue or a question around metric, just falling back to this framework is a very easy way to never lose a focus where you got started and why you got started with a specific metric or analysis, and also understand how much you can actually push your analysis. Like there's basically nothing beyond layering down your metrics. Like this is analytics, like finding out what you want to do and look at, and then find some way to look into this metric by breaking it down. That's all. That's what data analysts do all day long. They have more sophisticated, of course, queries, and they write more sophisticated analysis, but this is exactly what they do. One metric with the lens of one segment of users or one segment of properties for the events. The last piece, which I think is very important, is how do you come up and make make hypotheses? Today's analytics, let's say, world is made of hypotheses. You need to measure things and you need to make hypotheses as to why things are working or not working. So it comes into two steps. The first one is to be able to identify opportunities, and the second one is to make hypotheses. So about opportunities, we talked about metrics, which are the proxy for your goals. The hardest part, I think, is to get a feeling whether these metrics you're looking at are good or not good metrics compared to the benchmark. So we talk about the conversion rate, right? Let's say you find out your conversion rate is in your sign up is like 10%. The question is like, should you actually work on that? Is it good or is it bad compared to the benchmark, right? And so here, what you want to do is you want to find benchmark. So you want to talk with people who have worked on these kind of features in the past and ask them how it looked like when they work on it in the previous company, right? You want to talk with your investors, you want to talk with your friends, colleagues, mentors. You can Google it. The problem with Google is that it won't give you very good result, to be frank. You can also ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn. We're helping like a lot of companies. We're seeing a lot of benchmark. We'd be happy to, tell you what we think is a good or a bad result, depending on what you're looking at. So once you know that, then it's a good time to make some hypotheses. So let's say a metric doesn't look good. Like let's say, I'll bring up an example here that we had at N26. We had this sign up, which was made of 15 steps. And one of the steps had a very big drop off. Like whenever we were asking people their tax number, they would just drop off because no one knows this by heart. So what we did is we identified the large drop in the sign up for this specific step. We had a tracking event here and we had a tracking event for the next step. And we found out like, majority of people were not continuing. So here what we did is we talked to users and made hypotheses ourselves. And we realized that it seems like the finding your ID was hard. And so that's why people were actually discouraged and they were just dropping. Or actually another thing that kind of happened weirdly is that people were looking for their IDs at their place, in their closet and drawers. And the phone was locking. And then there was this weird thing on iPhone where when you were opening an iframe in an app and the phone was locking, it was kind of rebooting the app. And so actually what we found out is that we tested some solutions for this hypothesis, and we found out that it was fixing the problem, right? And so the solution was to actually make this field as optional, get people to finish the sign up without providing the ID. And then we were doing we were chasing the customers to basically ask them for the ID for 2 weeks to make sure that we didn't have to close their account. So it was like, kind of a trade-off, like let more people sign up, but then closing more accounts versus, blocking people up front. That is a kind of hypothesis you want to be able to do and roll out, on which you want to roll out some solutions to improve it. So that's it for today. Congratulations if you stick with me until now. Probably, hopefully you learn a lot. And if you start to apply some of these concepts, I hope you are making some great steps, toward building a data-driven product. That's the process we saw today. The goals metrics tracking framework, the stages to analytics epiphany framework, from feature-audit to zooming in to using properties. And hopefully now you also understand the importance of being able to make some hypotheses in your product to actually improve it over time. That's my email if you want to reach out to me later on. Enzo@june.so. Happy to support you with anything analytics related. Yeah, whether it's product analytics or else, there are just many stuff out there.
All right, then I guess we can wrap it up. Enzo, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us today. And yeah, please let us know if you have any questions. You can always drop me or Enzo an email, and hope to see you on other sessions later this week.
Thank you. Have a nice one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.